Welcome to the Monday market update. We're talking mortgage rates. We're talking real estate market. We are talking about the all-important Fed week, where the Fed is not only getting together and making a decision on what to do with the Fed funds rate, but they're also having a little press conference. And I know my buddy Nash Paradise will be listening to what our buddy Jerome Powell says. This meeting also comes with summary of economic projections, right, Nash?
Yeah, we got new dot plots coming up in this week's meeting, which is what we care about. No one is expecting the Fed to drop interest rates. In fact, they're not. You can go ahead and put all your money on that. I'm not sure what odds Vegas is giving right now for that, but they're probably not very good. Fed is not dropping rates this week. But again, that dot plot is going to indicate where we're going on short and long-term projections, and that's what we really care about. So speaking of things that we care about, let's jump in and talk about what happened last week. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put on my Nostradamus hat here again and say, you remember Wednesday? Remember where we said, hey, hold up? Yeah, Wednesday was the day. We had a great rally last week, Wednesday and Thursday, and here's why. So what we had was core year over year and month over month CPI. So this is your consumer price index. This is your inflation. This is what a lot of markets care about. PPI, I feel like most markets care about more, but hey, we got headline and core CPI numbers. They were both expected to go up. So what you're looking at here in this little chart from Wednesday is, the miss on the consensus. So you saw month over month on, what is the core price. That was showing 0.3% projection. We came in at 0.1, which is really, really cool. Now, is it really 0.1? No, it's 0.19 or something like, 0.196. But it was enough of a miss. So we had enough of a miss. So basically, inflation is lower than everyone thought. They thought inflation was going to increase. And in fact, it stayed straight line or decreased a little bit. So we saw a rally start Wednesday. And as we got into Thursday and jobs numbers, there was no major misses, no big changes here. The jobless claims were pretty flat. Producer prices missed a little bit here. That's the one on the bottom is off by 3%. So things were good Wednesday and Thursday. What happened Friday? Well, we reverse tracked just a little bit, not enough to erase the gains from Wednesday and Thursday. We got some issues with a skirmish in the Middle East here, which generally will move things economically. It hasn't had a lot of impact yet. But the consensus sentiment on 1 year inflation as well as the 5-year inflation came in, and we just erased some of those gains. So largely, last week was a good week for mortgage rates, even though we trailed off on Friday a bit. It was a good time. Any additional thoughts on last week's economic news, Mr. Mortgage Guy?
Not necessarily. Just for the recap. If you're looking at just mortgage rates, I just took a quick glance at last week, and it was 4 green days, meaning Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Rates got incrementally better those 4 days, and 1 red day, which was Friday. Not any, huge moves. We're talking, it looks like it went from like 695 to 685 across those 4 days. If you're looking at Mortgage News Daily's 30-year average, 30% down, great credit, paying a point, and then gave back 0.04 of that to end the week at 6.89, and we'll look at that chart later. So yeah, interesting market. Mortgage rates are always something that we can't help but keep an eye on as mortgage brokers, because it's something that's very important to the average consumer.
100%. Let's talk about what this week looks like, and we can go quick because this is what we consider a slow week. Not much going on Monday. Tuesday's retail sales numbers shouldn't really be much to move the needle. We've got pretty good data going into that. And Wednesday is Fed Day. And usually Fed Day can be pretty exciting, especially if there's some unknowns here. There are no unknowns here. Not going to raise the rates, not going to lower the rates, going to stay right the same, and we're going to get our new dot plot. So it's that, presser afterwards. It's the new FOMC economic projections. That's what we care about. That's what we're looking at this week. Could it be a driver for markets? Absolutely. Wednesday is one of those days that we want to be careful with, because depending on what is said, that could move markets. Markets are going to react based on, what Powell and the other Fed chairs or the other Fed board members have to say. And we have no idea exactly what that's going to be. But let's talk a little bit about what the projections are for the Fed on our next slide here, because people have messed up my pretty slide deck. I don't know if you picked up on this, Matt, but we got a new column. I don't like this new column. New column is that 450 to 475. So someone in the group that gets to vote on these, that gets to offer their opinion on the Fed funds rate, the group with CME Fed Watch, has got us 0.06% likely to increase rates on Wednesday.
Wow.
Yeah. Not going to happen. But
they put that in there, just to add an extra column and add some extra spice to it, even though it's such a long shot. It's like the Dallas Cowboys winning the Super Bowl next year.
That was unacceptable, Matt.
Sorry.
I know this to be true, but I don't need to hear that. I'm pretty sure the Cowboys are better than a 0.06% chance, but we're not going to talk about that here, jerk. So what are we looking at? Yeah, 425 to 450 is where we are currently. 99.94. It's not changing to Wednesday. It's probably not changing in July either. But we've been for a while targeting and circling that September meeting. I think we're going to get better clarification on this. In fact, by the next time we have a Monday market update a week from now, I think we're going to do a little bit better than a 75% chance on here. We've been at that 75-25 for a bit. I think the dot plot is going to be favorable just as we lean into knowing when that first rate drop is. Again, this is a year that we were seeing as many as 4 or 5 rate drops scheduled or projected, and then as few as 0. And now we're back up to 2. So the way to read this, 917 should be the first drop. Second drop here is projected very solidly on the 1210 meeting, 85% chance that hits. And then, we've had a third drop tweaking into December, jumping up in January. But now the third rate drop projections are very solidly in the March of 2026 category. So it doesn't make sense to focus too far ahead. But what I'm interested to see next week is whether or not the September projections get a little bit better. And maybe if we can even get the July stuff looking like there may be a drop in July, I think it's possible based on the rest of the world, but I think our greater economic conflict is going to impact that. So anything else thought-wise on the Fed funds rate projections?
Yeah, well, I think that it's actually, I tend to kind of tune out Jerome Powell and Fed, speak, because it tends to be like the same exact, like literally like verbatim, our dual mandate of, maximum employment and lowering inflation. But I think that this meeting, and I might be wrong with the dot plot and stuff, like, I don't know. For whatever reason, I think that they've gotten so much pressure politically. I saw something like JD Vance even jumped in and threw a quick, jab at Jerome Powell about lowering rates. And so I don't know, maybe they'll continue to just like brush that off and not pay attention to it. But I have a feeling that like there's just enough data to justify the beginning, of a rate cut cycle. And so I think Jerome Powell, maybe to appease them, will give more insight into here's the plan. Here's why I think, we're going to pause one or two more times and then, shed some light into maybe what he's going to do, but maybe not, right? Maybe he says the same stuff, which is a bunch of we're data dependent. So I'm not going to, tell you anything because I don't know the data that's going to come out in 30 or 60 days from now. But for whatever reason, I think I might be tuning in and listening and, putting myself through the torturous 30 or 40 minutes of gobbledygook, Fed speak this Wednesday.
Yeah, it's going to be painful, but I'll be watching as well. And we'll watch so you don't have to. But I have seen some of that pressure even coming from Jamie Dimon, CEO of Chase. And it was interesting because he's pretty sharp when it comes to numbers. He's, a billionaire for no accidental reasons. And he thinks that the Fed may wind up in some tricky territory this year where their dual mandate is counterintuitive, where what it takes to get inflation down is not necessarily going to help the employment figures. So there is some caution around that. I don't expect Powell to be very interesting, but I think the dot plot is going to tell a story. And we could see a different chart next week here on our Fed projections, which could be cool. We'll see. It has an impact. It's just a long gap between the Fed making moves before we really see any turn down or up on inflation. So let's talk about why we're really here, which is interest rates and where those have been going. And Matt, you already hit on this. Last week was a good week. You can see from that little peak we had the week before. Interest rates dropped basically steady throughout the week. And then Friday, we get a little blip up. I'll go ahead and ruin the secret for next week. Today, so far, Monday, we're pretty flat. There's not much going on. 4 basis points up and down. Things have been trading kind of sideways. It's a week of low expectations as far as rate movement goes until we get to Wednesday, so at least the early part of this week. Not much going on. Markets are closed on Thursday for the Juneteenth holiday. So any kind of movement is going to happen on Wednesday. And I think with that Wednesday being the day before a holiday, we may actually not see, quite as severe movement. And then you got to come back on Friday where we see some overreactions when things go up and we see everyone holding as things get better. So it could be a pretty mediocre, bland, blasé week as, we get some good information, but it may actually take into next week before we start to see any kind of movement from it.
Yep. Yeah. And, finally, I just want to touch on briefly, like how this affects the overall real estate market. Had some interesting conversations this weekend, as I always do. And I think as we look at those interest rates and we see, we're bouncing around the same range for about 6 months. I think I can safely say after 3 years of elevated interest rates in an environment where, most markets are holding their value or going slightly up in value over those last 3 years. Like affordability is still an issue. It's been an issue. It continues to be an issue. It will continue to be an issue. I think one thing that I would offer as a piece of advice, I'm just swirling this around in my head this morning as I was responding to an email, is consumers and agents and loan professionals, anybody who's involved in these conversations, we just have to set realistic expectations. I just see too many people, especially if it's a consumer, with unreal expectations. And so I guess I'm probably calling on the professionals in the room, the real estate agents and the mortgage brokers to just level set with your clients, whether they want to hear it or not. It's you can't in 2025 have a target of a $1,200 mortgage payment and expect you're going to live in 95% of the markets out there. It's just the math ain't mathin' for that. And so as uncomfortable as it might be, homeowners insurance is more expensive. So you can't expect that to all of a sudden, be cheaper because it feels uncomfortable. Just everything's more expensive. So you, just like you're not going to go out looking to buy a dozen eggs for $1, don't go out looking for a mortgage payment that is $1,200 a month. That's my public service announcement for the day.
And I'll close with this because I just got off the call with a couple that I've worked with before, done a couple loans. They're moving and buying in Florida, and she asked me straight up, well, because we were talking about this, making plans. We're going to use a 2-1 buy down. We got some builder incentives that are pretty heavy, and I was dissuading them from using them all to do permanent buy down on the rate. Investing $25,000 to buy a 5.49 on a VA loan, like, it sounds cool, but it's handicapping them in the future. They're going to be here for a long time. And when you invest that much money in on a permanent buy down, like, you're investing in keeping that. And as opposed to going to a higher rate, and in their case, it's like a 6.25, it saves like $17,000, and the payment differential was $269 a month. So I'm just doing math. Hey, you're going to have to be in this loan for almost 60 months to break even. Cool. We're not going to do that, and here's why. So, the takeaway there was, let's lean into this higher rate. And then from there, she got into, okay, well, does it even make sense to buy if we know what's going to happen in the market? We know that things are going to eventually have to come down and get cheaper. And, I think every market is different. But like you said, professionals need to stand up. Math needs to speak out. And we need to see, like, why does real estate make sense for you? And does this price point make sense? Are you overpaying when you do this new construction home? Whatever the situation is, math is our friend. And, we may not love the math right now, but really leaning into the numbers don't lie. We are data dependent, and the numbers are going to tell a story. And, I'm leaning on the professionals here. My call to action is to utilize the numbers and a little bit less of that emotion, and paint that picture of why one thing makes sense versus another, why it may make sense to either buy more house right now that you can stay in longer, or buy a lot less house to give yourself the positioning of comfort based on your other debts. Math is math. It doesn't lie. And so that's my call to action, is to really lean into that. So we're doing the best that we can to serve our clients.
Cool, man. Looking forward to some Fed Week recap with you next week, brother. Have a good one.
Gonna be a blast, man. Take care.
You too.